Hey, good morning, everyone. Very happy to have you here with us today. My name is Kim Rakedahl. I am the Program Supervisor Lead here at OSPI for School Counseling, and I will be joining you this morning with one of my presenters. Okay, thank you. All right, there we go.
The computer's about as awake as I am before I've had my coffee.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Beth Kelly. I will also be your co-presenter, and I work at the Washington Student Achievement Council. Over there, I'm an assistant director for college access and support, and I mainly work with Washington State Gear Up.
All right, well, we're very excited to present with you this morning information on some of the less traditional and sort of more unique ways in which students can pursue education or training beyond high school. So we're going to start out today's webinar just talking a little bit about some of the basic ways in which we can support students in the process of transitioning from high school to whatever they choose to do afterwards. We will share with you some resources that we are really happy to give out to the field today around some of these other pathways that students may choose to pursue. And you can see down in the third block of our objectives for today, the 5 different areas that we'll be focusing on in looking at those pathways for students to get beyond high school and into their goals and dreams for their future. So before we get started, I do want to just have a little bit of a vocabulary check here real quick. Part of the reason that we designed this webinar around all the options that aren't 2- and 4-year college is because we all have so many resources available already for the students who are choosing to pursue those 2 pathways out of high school. So we wanted to focus on areas that are a little bit less familiar for some of us and that we may not have as many students who choose these pathways, but partly it could be because they don't know as much about these pathways. So we're hoping to not only increase your ability to support the students that you have this year who are beginning their transition out of our public education system, but also to think about how these resources might be well utilized with your other students, freshmen, and all the way through to those seniors who are in the process here that we're going to be talking about today. So when we talk about this idea of college, can anybody put in their chat box what you think this visual represents in terms of the word college? Does anybody see something on here that speaks to them around what this might represent if we were to say this is what the word college looks like it means? I'll give you a second to take a look at what's on the screen there, and if anyone sees anything that it sounds like it might look similar to all right, I've got university. So again, when we hear the word college, oftentimes I think what a lot of our families hear in particular is the idea of 4-year colleges and universities. But what we want to make sure is really clear from our perspective is that when we talk about the word college, we also mean this system too. Washington is really blessed to have a very robust 2-year college system of 35 different community and technical colleges in the state of Washington, really in all regions for the most part across our state. And so we've got a lot of opportunity for our students when we think about that 2-year technical and community college system. But we're also thinking about college in the realms of apprenticeships, which is the picture there of the trade. It's an old school picture, obviously, relative to what some of our apprenticeships mean today, but it is what often people think of when they hear the word apprenticeships is the skilled trades. We know it goes beyond that into some more of our other more technical fields. And then, of course, at the bottom is our military service. And we'll talk about the different ways that students can embark on their education and training through the military system and be able to serve their country at the same time.
That's great. I do think that sometimes students think when they think of college, they think of what they've seen in sports or what they've seen on TV, which can be for-profit institutions. So we'll talk some more about those too. So it's good to expose students to a variety of options. And we're going to talk about ways that school counselors and college access professionals and just in general caring adults can do to help support students with exploration, preparation, application, and transition. But we'll share some resources around all of those topics. This will focus primarily around application, and we'll touch on supporting students who have some unique circumstances as well. One thing you can do as a college access professional or school counselor is you can initially have students review and update their high school and beyond plan. For the purposes of this webinar, we're assuming that we're at the point where students have done some exploration activities. This is their senior year, they're jumping into it. So we're going to assume that you've done some of that prep work already with students. If you haven't, you might have to help students register for exams, do some exam prep, and assist with fee waivers. Some additional things, if students are looking to narrow down their selection before the application period, you might host some campus visits. When you're taking kids to campus, it's always great to connect them to specific supports, such as like the diversity office or TRIO. We'll talk more about that soon. But one big thing that we want to encourage students to do and their families is to create an FSA ID and complete the FAFSA or WASPA. Regardless of what their top choice is, we want students to have options to fall back on, even if they don't want to go to a 2 or 4 year school. So we want you to also be informing students about what the senior timeline will look like and where they can get help. So again, you're probably going to be assisting students in narrowing down that fit and then helping them with the application process. Because the application process is confusing, it's good to avoid using jargon. So when you're talking to students and families, try to be attentive of your use of language and avoid assumptions. So if you're talking to students about financial aid or resources, it's always a best practice not to assume you know who you think is a US citizen, who is or is not in foster care, who is or is not have been homeless. So when talking about financial aid, it's a best practice to talk about WASPA and FAFSA and talk about all the different programs for students with different circumstances. And then it's also a great practice to learn about the specific needs of the student population in the post-secondary environment. So if you're helping a student, for example, with a college application, you might need to find out what gender marker they should use if they identify as transgender. It can help them understand what legally they need to put on that application and what steps they need to take afterwards. Or if you're working with students, it's helpful to explain to them what documentation they need to request an accommodation in college if they want to receive a special an accommodation with for their disability. So if a student has some unique circumstances, this is a point where it can be helpful to talk through that with students. And again, one other area is helping them communicate their circumstances on essays. Students always undersell themselves in scholarships and essays, and they don't see how wonderful they are. So helping them tease out some of that narrative is useful. And again, helping them find a good fit is useful. Low-income first-generation students often don't take the time or are able to visit institutions like their wealthier counterparts, and so they often undersell themselves and pick a school that's not necessarily the best fit. But fit is really related into persistence. And so it is important for them to find what works for them and help them think through things that they will need, like will they need housing, will they need transportation. So thinking, talking that through with students can assist them a lot in the exploration process.
So Beth, I just want to clarify one thing with you that I heard you say that comes up as a question a lot of times for students who are identifying as a different gender. My understanding, is that they need to use the gender that they are legally ascribed to at the time for their applications.
Yes,
as far as
it's what's on their current legal documentation. And we have a resource, if you're interested in that, we can talk about that later,
Sure.
that walks through the process. So
right.
that's an important factor, and you can follow up with the institutions.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification.
Let's see, some of the other strategies that I would employ with first-gen low-income students who are typically our college-bound students would be, again, assisting them in that financial aid process and scholarship application. One thing that I think, though, that often goes underlooked, if you're able to do any sort of workshop or host any kind of event, or if you take on any advisory and you can do a classroom lesson around it, I think it's very important to talk about imposter syndrome, growth mindset, and self-advocacy. Those three things play a huge role in the persistence of a student after in that post-secondary program. Imposter syndrome, the students come up against a challenge and they think that, it's all on them and they don't belong, where they're at. But what they don't realize is everybody's experiencing those challenges, and it's not a personal failure. So we really need students to be self-advocates and realize, like, they're paying for these services and they deserve to have assistance and to have a growth mindset. So the mindset aspect, I feel like, is not talked about as much. And we get bogged down in financial aid, which is important, but I think helping students, if you can do an advisory lesson or workshop, I think that is a good transition part. And again, remind them that there are resources out there to help them, and you can show them those if you visit campuses or whatnot, and other supports including TRIO that are on 2- and 4-year campuses. But other programs have additional support, and so if you can connect them to those resources or to a specific person, even better.
Okay, fantastic. So want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some student populations that historically have not accessed a lot of post-high school education or training, and more often than not need significant support in this process because of their circumstances. And those are the increasing numbers of students that we see who are living in a temporary situation and or living in the foster youth program. So when we think about our students who are not in a steady home environment, I think it's really important that we realize every district is supposed to have a homeless student liaison. And so I know in the district my children attend, that person is actually the secretary for our superintendent at the district office. She's been incredible and amazing in providing those supports throughout our district. So it may take a little asking around if you don't know who in your district has been designated to fill that role. But ideally, we would get every student who is not in a stable living situation connected with that person as a resource so that they have someone they can go to in addition to whatever resources are in your building. This is a really key population in which we, as school counselors and as folks who are supporting students in their transition out of high school, need to be talking about hope for their future. I think our students who are in these living situations often feel hopeless around the things that they can move into as they progress out of our public education system. That might be the biggest sense of stability that they have, and it can be really scary for them to contemplate losing that stability and going to the next step in their life. And so as we're talking with them about any dreams and thoughts that they may have about what they want to pursue, it's really important that we are ensuring they're getting that additional support from the folks in the district who can provide those resources so that they know they have folks they can count on to help them make this transition.
I just want to pop in and say I'm glad that you added that say student living in a temporary situation, because I think a lot of times students might not even consider themselves what we would define legally as homeless and access those resources.
That's right. And just to be clear, folks, that's anybody who's even sheltering with another family. They might be living with additional family members. And so ideally, we are looking for ways to provide those student supports that they may not even know they can access because they may not see themselves as homeless, but they're not in a stable living situation provided by their parents or guardians. And so really think about who those kiddos might be in your building and how you can get them connected with that district liaison. And then ultimately, when it comes to filling out financial aid forms, because obviously the general assumption would be that those students are going to need financial support in order to move into any kind of post-high school education or training, there is an independent student verification form through the FAFSA process, and I've linked to it here for you, where the student would need their social security number and date of birth, which again, that can be a challenge and a barrier for them to access that information. But if there's any way to get that with them, then they can fill out this additional form, and that lets the federal government know that they are essentially living in a temporary situation and do not necessarily have the support of family or guardians in which to help them with their post-high school plans. And so that can give them additional opportunities for financial aid.
Right. They would more likely be considered an independent youth and not a dependent.
Right. And then I linked to a couple resources here that I thought could be really helpful for you in working with these unique students. The first is a letter that was actually written by another student who was coming out of a temporary living situation, and the way in which he transitioned from high school to college, and sort of a lessons learned and some ideas of things that he wished he had known going into it. But it's pretty inspiring to see how this student came from such a challenging situation to going to college and persisting through some of those challenges that come along in that process. And then there is another link here to some tips for you in just helping our transitional youth succeed in college, in case you're looking for some kind of quick and easy resources to use in your buildings. Then when we talk about the foster youth system, this is really another key demographic that we are focused on here at OSPI, because the opportunity gaps and the outcomes for these students are so low relative to their other peers who are living in more stable and affluent living situations. So there are actually, as the foster care system prepares to transition a student out of that system at 18, excuse me, they have what they call a 17.5 meeting. And this is where their caseworker has a meeting with the family and any other supports who are connected to that student to talk about their future plans for what they intend to do when they exit the foster care system. And if at all possible, if there's someone from the school who could be present or even, call into those meetings with those students, that can just provide that really clear communication channel and that conduit of information back and forth between the state system that is supporting that student, excuse me, and then what the school can provide. Excuse me. And then again, so this is another population of students who we know is going to need significant support in applying for any kind of post-high school education and any financial aid that would go with them. The most beautiful part about this is if they have been in the foster care system since the age of 13, they essentially can get almost their entire college education paid for and have very minimal costs to deal with through some of the government or the governor's scholarship and some other initiatives in our state funding, the state need grant. Lots of opportunities for our foster youth to get access to whatever post-high school path they may want to pursue. And if they've been in the foster system at all, they can have access to some additional supports as well. But especially for those who have been in after the age of 13, that kicks in a lot of additional supports for them. That is a first come, first serve pot of money. And as we all know, we have not figured out a way to grow money on trees yet in Washington State. And so despite the legislature's continued efforts to support our low income students, we still see not enough to go around. And so it's really important that we work with these kids in October and November and get them connected to these resources and get them through these processes for financial aid as quickly as we can.
Well, a couple of things that I would also throw out there is I would want students to also fill out the WASFA if that's the application they're most eligible for. You only fill out one, the FAFSA or WASFA, but if you are in foster care even for one day after the age of 13 or 13 and later, you're auto-enrolled in the college-bound scholarship.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. And there's a lot of overlap with foster and homeless youth. A lot of homeless youth or youth who've been experiencing that have been in foster care for a short time. So it's always good to just double check and make sure that they are accessing resources that are open to them.
Yep.
And we'll talk more about unique circumstances.
And as always, you know, in an hour webinar, we have to be really careful about how much we're trying to push out to you all. So the links that you see in purple on the screen, obviously it's going to take a little time for you to go back and peruse these once we get this posted. But I did link you to some information on other types of aid and scholarships that are available for foster youth. The college programs that are available to support them once they actually transition, that can be a really key connector you can make with them to ensure when they make a decision that they know where to go to for support when they get to their college campus. And then the Law Center for Foster Care and Education actually had a really great checklist that I thought was a nice, easy reference that you could use to kind of help those youth as they transition. So those resources are there for you. And then when we talk about students with disabilities, again, this is another population of students where we see outcomes that aren't at the same level as their more able-bodied or affluent peers. And so this visual, if you can read what's on the bottom there, it just represents a visual of the number in a kind of a percentage format of the total enrollment for colleges in the state of Washington. And then the blue line, as you see at the bottom, is the relative percentage of students with disabilities who are actually enrolling in some kind of 2- or 4-year college after high school. And so that's a visual way to look at what we know is an area of growth and improvement in the state of Washington, which is to help these students make those transitions to opportunities that fit their skill sets and their interests and their needs. So when it comes to supporting students with disabilities, I want to share again a few tips and some resources for you. So obviously we need to be working hand in hand with our staff that are in the special services department so that we can be developing those really appropriate post-high school goals that are based on where they're at during their high school years and some data related to their skills, strengths, interests, needs, etc., so that their high school and beyond plan and their individualized education plan, their IEP, are aligned around education and training and employment goals for that student, as well as for some, they may have some goals around becoming independent in their living situation and needing the skill sets in those areas. So again, this is really just about the importance of collaboration with that department of staff, with our counseling staff and our college advising staff. And then I know it's a little hard to read, so I apologize for the font color, but also working with our special services staff to identify those transition and support services that are available beyond high school. Our 4-year and 2-year institutions almost always have an Office of Disability Services or some staff that are designated on their campus to support students who have, whether it be cognitive or physical disabilities, that they need additional accommodations and supports. That's a really key piece to make sure that we are helping students find access to that information and connecting with them with those college staff. Also, where they can go for counseling or other social emotional supports, because as we all know, we are seeing increasing concerns for the ways in which our students are transitioning to these opportunities and not feeling like they have the skill sets to be successful there, to deal with being away from home for the first time, or the stressors of a different environment, taking care of themselves. Lots of ways in which our college students are struggling and needing additional supports while they're there on campus and away from the safety net that we have provided for them in our public education system. And then how do we get them connected to extracurricular activities or community organizations that can provide them that connection and that link, not only on a personal level, but also if there's anything that matches their career interests and goals that we could get them connected with and help them find access to. Those are all the kinds of things that help student persist when they run into those first rounds of finals, or they run into that first little bit of a snafu with their federal financial aid, or any of those things that come along where it can be very easy for some to just go, I just don't know how to deal with this, I'm out of here. We want to avoid that. Also looking at how are we working with the family and school staff to provide these students with opportunities to really explore those post-high school options they may think that they are interested in, and develop really, really concrete self-advocacy and self-management skills. And this applies really to students across the board, not just our students with disabilities.
I would even say some of the other strategies you've mentioned are very excellent strategies for working with first-gen students.
Absolutely.
Any students, really.
Absolutely.
Truly, everybody's going through those challenges.
You bet. And again, you know, we're couching these tips and these tools in certain populations, but of course, all of this stuff is great stuff for working with any kiddos. And so these links here are specific to working with students with disabilities and have some really great focused advice for folks and some strategies to helping them build these skills. And then last but not least, of course, I've got a couple of linked resources here for you. This is from the college perspective of how they can work with students with disabilities in trying to help them access college opportunities from a financial standpoint, and then a guide around the skill development for students with disabilities so that they are able to persist in their exploration of post-high school options.
That's great. That's great information. We are going to touch on just one other set of students with a unique circumstance that would come into play during this application process. And then we're going to dive into some of the different branches or areas that you could explore. Well, when we talk about undocumented students, really that's just an umbrella term for people who entered the United States and they may have DACA, or they may have entered with U.S. Legal immigration documentation and now it's out of status. So when we talk about these students and families, they may rely on a school counselor first for information regarding financial aid above other sources. So as a school counselor, college access professional, you're their primary source. They may be, and I would say not even maybe, I would say they're scared and concerned about their future given our current political climate. And the majority of these students and families have lived in the United States for over a decade. And this is where we want folks not to make assumptions about who is or who is not a legal U.S. citizen. I've seen school staff with the best of intentions making assumptions about Latino families and that they must be the ones that we're targeting for not targeting, but those are who we should promote WASPA to when they may have a high Somali population or Russian population that they're not aware of that would benefit from those resources. So it's good not to make assumptions. Well, one of the strategies you can do is to make sure your website, electronic material, printed material, it's available in different languages. And a great thing you can do is show that you are an ally and your office is a safe space. And that is true with other vulnerable populations. For example, if you're working with foster youth, you could maybe print out the logo for Passport, which is a foster care program. Most students wouldn't know what that symbol means, but a foster youth might. And you could have that outside of your office. There's various signage that you can put outside your office that shows you're an ally. And I think that would be really true with students who are undocumented given this climate. So when talking about financial aid nights, again, I would refer to them not as FAFSA nights, but as financial aid nights. Make sure you're normalizing and being inclusive when you're promoting your events and resources.
So I would even jump in, Beth, because I've heard this in some areas, not consistently across the board, but there are sometimes even some reactions to the topic of financial aid because families will often feel a sense of pride and not wanting to accept a handout. And so I've also heard it said that even calling your family nights paying for college or
that is true.
paying for education.
So the fact of the matter is a lot of our low-income students are not going to, they're going to be able to get grants and great aid. So we do want them to understand that they're deserving of that aid. So we should, that is a great, I like that.
Yeah, again, not across the board, but I hear it pop up occasionally. And so I think when we're being inclusive in our language, we want to think about it and what's the most inviting way to say that.
Well, you always hear about student loan debt. And so I think that oftentimes people just make the assumption when you're talking financial aid, you're talking about loans.
That's right.
And then let's see, the one last thing I wanted to point out is we've recently at my office, the Washington Student Achievement Council, have been discussing a nuance with the WASPA application, which is the financial aid application you would fill out if you are an undocumented student and you want state financial aid and you meet the residency requirements. So normally a student who is a U.S. citizen would fill out the FAFSA, but because of immigration concerns and that have been going on across the country, some parents, some students who are legally here who have a parent or parents who are undocumented, even though that student would be eligible to fill out the FAFSA, their parents are hesitant because when a parent would help out with that, they would enter zeros for their social security number, which would be a red flag that they are not here legally. And so apparently a nuance has come out that students could instead fill out the WASFA and record their parent information there. And so more information about that, I think some more guidance will be available. So that's just something to keep on your radar if your families are feeling unsafe, and even though they would be eligible to fill out the FAFSA, they could fill out the WASFA instead. However, they'd only be eligible for state financial aid, so they probably still would need to apply for scholarships and whatnot. Okay. And then I just wanted to touch base real quick about some additional resources. The two resources that are up here, the one on the left, the College Access Considerations, that's a guidebook. It's a primer on things that a college access professional or school counselor needs to think about when working with LBGT youth, students who are experiencing homelessness, who may have been in care, students who are undocumented or first gen, and students with disabilities. And it goes into specific steps and strategies and some legal guidance at times. And that is available at our Gear Up website for free, and it has a ton of resources in there. So if you want to dig deeper into 2- and 4-year college access considerations, this would probably be a good resource to check out. And then the one resource on the right is the 12th year campaign, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that really, it does support 2- and 4-year much more than other pathways, even though it's supportive in general of all pathways. But that's a student workbook, and it can help them get organized and get all their ducks in a row to be ready to apply for financial aid and to the post-secondary institution.
So they'd want to be looking at that right away.
Yeah, it's great even for juniors too, to take a look at and get on the radar.
Well, before we transition to the second part of our main part of our presentation, I want to just remind everyone, if you have questions that come up as we are talking, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We look at it throughout our presentation and we'll try to answer them as they come up. We were going to pause here for some questions, so if you have anything burning, please type it in. But we're already behind schedule a little bit. We only have about 23 minutes left, and we want to get to the really meaty part of this presentation today. So please send in your questions if you've got them, and we may have to get to them after, but we will be happy to answer your questions.
Yes, I'll try to be brief because we can send out this PowerPoint which has more information. So if you want to dig deeper, you could. But the next I wanted to talk about one option that, I'll be honest, as a Gear Up person, I don't generally talk about with students, and it's that gap year learning opportunity. But I've talked to Kim, and I've I've opened my mind up to this possibility. So I'll just be honest, my knee-jerk reaction is fear that life will get in the way and kids won't go on to a more solid post-high school plan. However, we talked about it, and I think there's certain students that this might be a great fit for, and I think when we talk about gap year in this way particularly, it means something different than my knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
Kim, do you want to explain what you thought when you hear gap year, what you think it is?
Well, I'll be honest, the gapyearfairs.org link that I put in here for you, I was astounded the first time I went on that website and really looked at the depth and breadth of opportunities that have grown for students. I don't know if it's President Obama's daughter's declaration of doing a gap year, or if it were just things that were growing because we have more and more students who are recognizing not only their interest to go do something to give back or to connect outside of their community, to be on an adventure, to build skills and interests, but also more and more students are recognizing that they're going on to these post-high school options that seem to be what we're supposed to do in order to be successful, and they're not finding the path that they want to pursue, and then they find themselves in debt and, you know, potentially with a degree that is not going to be super helpful for them in finding a family wage job. So for me, when I really started delving into this as a school counselor, I really feel like there are some great opportunities out there to support students in taking that year to find themselves, to involve themselves in a program that is linked to what they even think they might want to do, or some curiosities that they have. I would say it's really important to look for a couple things with any gap year program. Obviously, any ratings or reviews of given program, and also how easy and accessible is information about that organization, what's their reputation.
See, and I think this is where I did not have that understanding. When Kim's talking about it, she's talking about programs and specific options, and my knee-jerk reaction is just thinking that a student's going to take off a year and work, and even though that is valuable, I feel like life can get in the way if you don't have a specific plan, especially when you don't have a school counselor or someone to help you fill out financial aid forms or do some of the work in a year. And so I was just gonna tell you though that I found out that Princeton and Tufts and other big name schools now, they offer their own programs. However, if a student doesn't have a plan, if they haven't thought through like the location and budget and logistics and how this fits into my exploration and whatnot, if it's not like well thought out and it's not part of an intentional strategy, a student is a lot less likely to link back up and go into a 2 or 4 year school.
Well, and I think the statistics back that up, but I loved your thought when we were talking about inviting these students that you know as a counselor have transitioned into a gap year or have transitioned into a job, inviting them back for the next fall's, you know, opportunities to explore other options as a way to reconnect them if it looks like they are slipping into a, wow, I'm kind of not sure how to move forward now. I don't have the supports that I used to. So anyway, just a thought.
No, but that's right. If you're working with students who should be filling out a WASPA or FAFSA every year, it's always great to even invite back old alum and to a night. They might be more comfortable asking you questions
than their college.
So that's a great idea. And again, just I want to throw a little warning out. If a student is planning to go to like a 2 or 4 year school after a gap year, say for example it's a 4 year, they could apply to that 4 year, their senior year in high school, and get accepted, and then declare or ask for a deferral, and their school will have, if that's what they intended to do, and defer their enrollment and go do a program where they're volunteering or seeing the world or whatnot. Their school, they should check. It's probably even on their website now. You can find out what that process is. They'll probably have students fill out an intent to register. You may have a deposit things like that. So you should be aware. You also could lose scholarships. So if a student is applying and they are asking for deferment, they really should look into what that really means and make sure that they're not losing any aid, or they're not, there's a different set of circumstances, so they need to be aware of that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I'll just be real quick on this. AmeriCorps. I love AmeriCorps. I was an AmeriCorps member. It's like it was the best decision I've ever made in my entire life, and it is a great gap year opportunity. But if you don't do it before college, you could always do it afterwards, and you get an ed award, and a lot of institutions will match that ed award dollar for dollar. You can do it anywhere in the country and pretty much on any kind of subject. So if you're interested, if you have students interested, check that out. I think that is a great gap year option.
Yeah.
Tons of programs.
Yeah, again, when you've got those students who have just really dove into community service and are passionate about service, this is one way to direct them towards some opportunities.
Yeah. And there's employers that prefer AmeriCorps. There's a network of like 500. So
very well supported.
It's a good alum.
Very reputable.
Yeah.
Okay, so, if we're being really honest here, I think oftentimes those students who choose to go get a job after high school, it feels like a letdown. It feels like, oh, wow, less than those who are choosing to go on to some kind of further education. And I think it's really important that we keep in mind that we are doing everything we possibly can to meet students where they are and to fit their post-high school plan to their needs and their interests and their skills. And for some of our students who've really maximized their opportunities in high school, maybe through a skill center, maybe through Running Start or other dual credit programs, maybe through their CTE offerings within their own building, they may actually be ready and prepped already to go dive into a career path that they have done the education and training for already. So we got to be really intentional in how we're messaging about some of these less prevalent opportunities that, and pathways that our students are following. So
it also doesn't mean that they won't go to college
of course
later.
Not.
We are a
Absolutely
continuing education society, so it's good to support both.
Absolutely. And I think, again, we want to make sure students are looking at what they're ready for and what is going to meet their interests and hopefully make them happy. So we've put together some resources and some ideas here for you about how to help those students with transitioning to a job or an internship. So obviously they've got to get some access to what are some of the jobs that are trending out there? What is it? They look at YouTube for what's trending every day. So what are the jobs that are trending out there? How can I find out where some of the career areas are that I could, really dive into as a pathway that could move me forward? And so Career Bridge is a free resource in the state of Washington that I've linked you to here that does have Washington specific information, and they can even localize it to their county or their sort of workforce area. Then it's a matter of, oh gosh, where do I even look for postings? And so internships.com is a really great resource because it posts both job postings and internships for school-aged young adults. And
internship could be considered a gap year too.
Oh, absolutely. But, and some are paid and some aren't. So
it's not.
Sometimes it's a job and sometimes it's a gap year. But either way, great foot in the door opportunities for students to progress into a career pathway. And then comes sort of that process around how do I build or adapt my resume. We even learned a new term around resume, which is a visual digital resume, more like a video that seems to be becoming more popular as a way of introducing oneself to a potential employer. But obviously, whether it's a resume or a resume, you're always wanting to make sure those keywords that you pull out of the job posting are embedded in that document, because a lot of employers are still using that initial robo screening where they're pulling on those keywords, and you might not even get through a first screening if you haven't embedded those in your resume and or your cover letter. I linked you to WorkSource here. This is our local WorkSource group here in Thurston County. They're regionally based, and so you may want to look for one that's closer to your region. But those are excellent, excellent go-to organizations to help students with this transition, and they will work with your high school students to give them those opportunities to meet with a one-on-one person who can help them develop their resume and cover letter and really learn how to address it to a given job posting so that it's obvious it's not a template that they've just built to go get their first job, that they're really being intentional about tweaking what they do, kind of like we do for college application, you know, personal statements or our scholarship applications. We always got to make sure we're tweaking it to fit who we're actually trying to apply to. So there's some great resources there. Some other resources that students can use that are really student friendly. The College Board uses bigfuture.com. They've got a whole section on careers that's incredibly well built and managed by a very large company that keeps everything current. And then they've actually pushed out a link to a new organization called joblaunch.org. And it has some great resources on the National Hiring Day for teens and young adults that was really cool. That's where we got this information about the new resume approach that's becoming more popular out there. So I encourage you to get your students access to those web pages. You know they're better than we are about going in and taking a look and surfing through those resources. Then obviously there's some things you can do within your counseling center, your career center, offering them an opportunity to actually fill out a job application, you know, making that even part of their high school and beyond plan so that every student's doing a job application or a college application, they won't regret it. If they're not headed that direction right after high school, they're going to do it at some point. Might as well get that skill set and work on figuring out how do I do this in a way that has no errors, that's clean and neat, and all those things that we know make them a good candidate. Oftentimes, I found that community members, community employers were more than happy to come in and do mock job interviews with students who were looking to go into the workforce and or apply for a college access. So some of our really high-powered selective colleges do interviews. It's really helpful to give students a chance to practice with someone who can give them really concrete feedback. And then I put down there kind of as a reminder to myself, establishing a career board or a job board outside your counseling office or your career center where you can post things that have been vetted locally, where students can get connected to those opportunities in your community or within your school. All great ways to give them connections to that network that we know is so key, especially with getting those first jobs. Sometimes it's who you know, not what you know, that's more important. And have to put up in that upper right hand corner. I almost made it red, but it didn't go with our color scheme. Reminding students of the importance of cleaning up their social media and using appropriate email addresses, as well as actually checking their email once they submit any kind of applications anywhere. They don't use email like we do. We look like dinosaurs to them just because we're using email. And I know in our office we've had lots of conversations about there is too much email.
Well, they also have to be able and willing to make phone calls.
That is true.
And that is like
that is very true. But I will, you know, I will just put that out there. Please be reminding them about looking at their social media, taking things down that could be taken out of context or that are in any way potentially damaging to who they may look to be. This is for jobs as well as kids going on to colleges. Lots of colleges and employers are checking social media now, so it's really a key part of their process. And then finally, that follow-up etiquette. How long should they wait? Give it a week after you turn in an application, and if you haven't heard anything, call them back. You know, just wanted to check in and make sure you got my application. Is there a timeline by which I could expect to know whether or not I'm going to have an interview or what might be the process, so I know? Just some of those pieces around that persistence that's so key for them to maybe land that first opportunity. And then we've got to make sure we're maybe putting any personal biases aside that we may have about the military. I know it can be very challenging having worked in high schools for 20 years. I know that at times those recruiters can be really persistent. They're doing their job to the best of their ability. They're passionate about what they do. It can feel a little overwhelming and uncomfortable to be pushing, you know, these opportunities. But it's really, really important for us to remember that the military just is not just about combat. This isn't about sending our kids off to be, you know, involved in the next conflict around the world. There are so many important opportunities for our kids, not only to serve their country, but to get education and training that's related to their passion and their goals in their life and to get it in a way that often costs them nothing other than their service, which again, we have different opinions on what that may or may not look like as an individual. But when we're looking at how are we serving our kids and how are we connecting them to these opportunities we don't talk as much about, this is one that I know from my own 17 years in school counseling, we often have room for improvement and putting these out there for families to consider.
Yeah,
so,
I would rather students make an informed
decision.
If that's what they're going to do.
Well, and again, not that this is a fallback or that this is, I couldn't do anything else, right?
That's not, and I don't mean that at
You're
all.
right.
But I just mean, like, I'd rather students look at all of these opportunities that are available across the board and make an informed decision on what is best for them. You bet.
So again, all of the purple text up here is links to direct resources for you and your students to help them with things like taking the ASVAB, using their career exploration program that they give students access to once they've taken the exam, and then how to get that whole recruitment process started. All those things are here. Usually your recruiters are contacting you, so you don't have to do too much. But here's some resources in case you need some help. And then want to make sure that when we're thinking about the military, we're also acknowledging that there are actually opportunities for students to go to those four-year colleges and very selective four-year opportunities to serve and to get their education and training, often most of it paid for, if not all. So the Reserve Officer Training Corps, that's where students can go to a four-year college and be trained as a military officer at the same time. We're linking you to those places where you, your students and yourself can learn more about where are those opportunities. The state of Washington has a number of them in some Air Force and Army in particular. And then also keeping this in mind, that they not only will get a fabulous education and leadership training, but they tend to have a guaranteed post-high school job or post-college job waiting for them.
As an officer.
As an officer, right. So higher pay, higher esteem and in some ways, and obviously still those leadership skills are being fully developed for these kiddos. These are direct links to the four main branches that students can choose from, but also want to make sure we remember there is the National Guard and Merchant Marines, and so there are some other opportunities out there for students to choose from.
Well, what I learned is just that each of them have sort of a unique
They do, and that's what's a little hard about a webinar is couldn't even give you really a standard timeline because they all vary a little bit, but what's really important to know here is that an ROTC program is an additional application on top of their college application, and it has its own timelines that students have to pay attention to, usually is done by the end of December of their senior year. And there's the application to like an ROTC program, and then there's a separate application for the scholarship money that can be attached to those opportunities. So lots of important reminders there about the need for students to really be paying attention to all of those processes. And then last but not least, we have incredible opportunities for kids who are really interested in leadership and being an officer and service to their country through an academy, top-notch educations. It's a little late for seniors this year. If they haven't started, they're out, but they could continue to pursue a military academy by going through an ROTC program first, or even enlisting. I serve on Congressman Heck's Military Academy Selection Committee. I've been serving for about 6 years, and so I wanted to share with you some of the things I've learned through that process about getting into an academy. It is, for some students, really about persistence and continuing to try if they don't get in that first time because it is so selective. You'll see the visual there is about their timelines. It's much more rigorous than students who are just applying to college ROTC. There's even more to do here. And the tips that are here in this blue box, those are absolutely what I have heard over and over and over again from my partners who are all military, have all been through an academy themselves. When we sit on that committee, these are the things that we look for in our students who are there to interview. So you can read them. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be happy to share more.
That's like the Ivy League of military.
I mean, and honestly,
like
the military, the West Point, Annapolis, this is where you have a Merchant Marine Academy that doesn't get much airtime, but they actually will allow officers to go into any branch of the military. So many opportunities, and creme de la creme of the college world.
Okay.
And then again, I'm not going to belabor this list here
Mhm.
because we're running out of time, but I wanted to just share with you some of the benefits of using the military as your opportunity for further career and education and training. These are some things that result from being in the military.
Yeah, more options than I realized. And another option that we've heard a lot more students are interested in exploring is apprenticeship. And apprenticeship, you want to think about if it's a good fit. One of the things that makes it useful is that you get to learn from a master at that trade. You get to do hands-on work. Some of the things to consider, just remind students that drug-free, like marijuana, even though it's legal, you probably aren't going to be able to get into specific programs if you test positive for that. A lot of these are hands-on. They're looking for students who have a huge appetite to learn, and attitude and motivation go a long way. I'm
just going to jump in here real quick, Jessica. I just want to be mindful. I saw Jessica. Beth, sorry. I want to be mindful that all of you who are listening, I know that we are almost out of time. So I just want you to know we are going to continue to finish out our slides and provide our information. If you have to go, we totally understand. This will be posted and sent out once we have it finished, and it will be posted on the Ready, Set, Grad website, which is the Washington Student Achievement Council's sub-website on their page. So we will get that information out to you once it's ready. So if you have to go, please do, but we're going to continue to go all the way through our slides. It'll take us probably another 10 minutes.
Yeah. So I'll be succinct. So apprenticeships, students may apply directly once they turn 18 after high school, or they may go to a 2-year college program that leads directly into an apprenticeship. Students have to, some of the caveats that students may be unaware of is that they do have to be 18, and that usually they have to apply in person, even if that entity is across the state.
Right, and I just want to be mindful and clear with you all here that we are talking about registered apprenticeships in this slide. We often have students who will go become an apprentice at an organization through a family member or through somebody that they know. Our slides are about registered apprenticeships, just to be clear.
Yes, and they would go through the Department of Labor and Industries for that. So the slides that you'll get go into a little more detail about that, but the point that I want to make is that apprenticeships, each of them would have their own application and process. So again, this takes initiative on the student's part. This is where you can help them, but they're going to have to look up the application process for any of the apprenticeships that they're interested in.
And we've linked you to that site. The other thing I want to make sure is really clear for those of us who are trying to support students in this route is oftentimes the apprenticeship won't have an opening when the student turns 18, or the student maybe turns 18 in February and they need to finish high school, but they're accepting applications through March. So one of the things I found really helpful for my students to know when they were considering this route is that sometimes they just have to be patient and persistent. And whenever possible, to get connected to career opportunities, you know, some skill building, related career areas, any kind of thing that we can help them connect to that might build some skill sets for them, because they are often competing against adults who have a lot more work experience behind them to help them be a competitive applicant. So again, when you look at what does it take to be a competitive candidate, we won't read through these for you because they're pretty self-explanatory.
Well, I would just throw in there when you're talking about connecting to the employer, a lot of them say that they want a student who can show that they have researched that position and have demonstrated interest. And that's the same as 2- and 4-year schools, actually. A lot of them, you get higher, you know, marks, so to speak, if you have already demonstrated that interest. And so I think maybe if there was a gap, even making sure that that employer knew you were interested in staying connected would be a great way to connect.
You bet, you bet. Thanks for that, Beth.
And then we're going to talk just briefly on technical and specialty colleges. These options are good for students who have a specific career a goal in mind. They kind of want to get right into the job market quickly. The length and time of these programs will vary quite a bit because some will just be a certificate, but most commonly it's actually an AA. And some of the common fields are like nursing or auto mechanics, plumbing. So again, AA is pretty common, but students should still go visit the campus and research. What I want to just warn people a little bit about is for-profit. For-profit industry or institutions are pretty common, and they're the ones that students actually are usually aware of because you see a lot of advertising. They advertise aggressively on TV and other areas, and they target first-gen low-income students or veterans and whatnot, and a lot of them have had legal issues with fraud. I'm not saying all for-profit is bad, but if a student's interested, I would encourage them to do some research and make sure that it's legit. Often they have students come out with massive amounts of debt and don't have great experience getting jobs afterwards. And a lot have been sued for fraud, like
Not
Trump
good.
University.
All right.
So one last resource, if your students, I'm sure you will have some students who are interested in 2- and 4-year schools, and the 12th year campaign is ran by my agency, the Washington Student Achievement Council, and it connects the application process for colleges and financial aid, and now it's added in more transition pieces to help with summer melt into it. And so if you sign up for free, you can get free resources, like you can actually get printed nice copies of student handbooks.
Right.
And you can get our new Summer Melt Transition Handbook for 12th year graduates.
Wonderful.
And you can get more support through webinars. And we will be recording a senior cycle webinar on 2- and 4-year schools this month. And so we'll be able to share that out as well.
You bet. And what we did, in the interest of time, we knew we'd run out, which we did. We just have a couple additional resources pages that we've linked you to here. Beth does an amazing job with her Gear Up work of providing really concrete resources that you can use, whether your students are in Gear Up or not. They're really awesome.
It's really about keeping the college-bound student in mind,
right.
A low-income first-gen. So all of these you can take, you can steal, edit, do what you want with them.
So we've linked you to them. Hopefully you'll have some time to go back. For any of you who are still on the call, if you have any burning questions that you want to type into the chat box and have answered by one of us, we'll do the best to do that. Otherwise, here is our contact information. You are more than welcome to email one or both of us with some follow-up questions if anything has come up for you. I would also just ask, if you have a minute, this is the first time we've done this webinar as a team, and we would love any feedback you have on whether or not it met your expectations, if there was something you were really hoping to get out of this that we didn't cover, or if this was information that was new and really helpful for you. If you have the time, which I know is sort of a joke for a lot of us, but if you have a minute where you could send us a quick note on, you know, how this did or didn't meet your needs so we can make it better for the next time. We really are trying to focus on areas where we know there are gaps in supports for kids, and this seemed to be an area of gaps, so we thought we would try it out. Would love your feedback. And then you'll see our next OSPI WASAC Wednesday webinar is December 5th from 10:30 to 11:30 again. We will be covering some mental health and social emotional learning resources, sort of related to how the holidays aren't always happy for everyone. And
is that specifically for students or also for professionals?
We actually will have a little bit of self-care in there as well, and been working collaboratively with a lot of folks here at the agency and through WASAC, and really excited to provide you all with some concrete as well as systems level resources around mental health and social emotional learning. It is probably the #1 requested topic by school counselors these days, so very happy about that. And again, if you have time to send us your feedback and there's anything you would want us to make sure we include in that webinar, please feel free to let us know that as well. We are still developing that. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. We will do our best to get this posted prior to that next webinar. It takes us a little while to get the recording translated and get everything ADA compliant so we can post it, but it will be on the Ready Set Grad website. And it's under the Wednesday webinars. If you search for that, you'll find them on that website and can access those. We're just about ready to post the one we did in October around financial aid resources. So looking forward to that. Thanks again for your time, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.